Hey, everybody. I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about getting ready for the first race of the season, an early race, when you haven't been on the water much during the winter. I think this is important for a lot of people because a lot of people are living in colder climates, and when they have a particularly harsh winter like we did in my part of the world this year, it's really hard for them to paddle with any type of consistency. And then all of a sudden, they're racing at the end of April or the middle of May, and they're only getting on the water, at the last week of March or the beginning of April, and it doesn't leave them a lot of time to prepare. And yet, I think there's a lot of people who find themselves in that situation. So I wanted to talk a little bit about it to give you an idea, if you're one of those people, how to prepare for an early season race as best you possibly can without jeopardizing or compromising the quality of the preparation that you're going to do for the entire year. So, without compromising preparation for an important race that you have in the summer or in the late summer, September, October, or even November if you're doing something like the ICF Worlds. So I guess the first thing is to recognize that it's not ideal to be getting on the water and maybe only having 5 or 6 or 7 weeks to prepare for an important race. And I think that means it's necessary to sort of temper your expectations a little bit. No matter how badly you want to do well in an early season race like this, you won't be able to perform at the level that you are able to perform at in the summer or in the fall. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't bother to enter this early season race? Absolutely not. Racing is the most important thing that you can do if you want to be a racer. You learn every time you go out and perform in a race. Obviously, the learning that you do is probably higher quality if you're better prepared for the race you're going in. But racing is where you learn. It's where you put the things that you're doing in your training to the test, and it's where you learn about things like pacing and tactics and strategy, things like that you can't really practice to the same degree in a training session. And the more racing experience you get, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to race well, provided that you're doing all the correct training, in the races that are most important to you. So absolutely, you should do these early season races, whether your preparation is absolutely ideal or whether it's the best you can possibly do under these circumstances. The second thing I would say is if you're going to embark on racing early in the paddling season, it really helps if you've done some homework over the winter. Obviously, if you haven't been able to paddle, that homework isn't on water homework, but we all know that there's lots that you can do on dry land that can have a big impact on your performance in the water. So my hope is that if you're doing an early season race like this, that you took care of your homework during the winter, that you did a lot of land-based aerobic work, that you built your non-specific, means non-paddling, aerobic base. My hope would be that you spend a lot of time working on your strength. And also, through doing things like land drills, you're able to actually enhance your potential for paddling with really sound movement patterns when you get on the water. So hopefully maybe you've done a little bit of land drill work too. But then you find yourself on the water, say, for example, April 1st, and say you're racing in a Eurotour race on May 5th. And you've only got 5 weeks or maybe you're racing the week after. So what would that be? That would be like May 12th, May 13th, that weekend. You've maybe got 6 weeks, right? You don't have a ton of time. So how do you approach training for that? My suggestion is always for somebody who's just getting back in the water that you spend the first week at least, if not the first couple of weeks, just paddling, doing unstructured on water work. You can continue to do structured work on land, but the on water work, I strongly believe, should be unstructured. And it should be the type of work where your priority is simply to paddle well, to be connected, to have good rhythm to your stroke, and to have good movement patterns, to paddle with sound technique. My suggestion is also to people at this time of year is as long as you feel like you're paddling well, continue paddling. When you feel like the wheels are falling off, like your technique is decaying and it's getting really messy and ugly, you're losing your connection, you're losing your sense of rhythm, you feel like the things you want to do with your technique, you're not able to do as well. My suggestion is always just to stop. Just stop. Stand up straight on your board, maybe stretch out your back. Take anywhere from 15 seconds to a minute to just sort of gather yourself, refocus, and then start paddling again. You will be surprised at how much better you're able to paddle after that very short break. And then you might be able to paddle well for another 5 to 10 minutes before you may feel like you need to take another one of those breaks again. The idea is doing this that you're maximizing the number of really good strokes that you're taking, while at the same time minimizing the number of inferior strokes that you're taking. So you're creating really solid, sound movement patterns. You're laying solid movement patterns down on your nervous system, as opposed to going out and trying to grind out work without stopping before you're ready to do that and ending up paddling poorly because you're just trying to get the work done and you're trying to keep your heart rate in zone. And in the process, laying inferior movement patterns down on your nervous system, right? Like from a purely physiological standpoint, yeah, it's great because you stayed in your training zone. But remember, the most important pillar of performance in paddling is technique. And if you're just grinding out work and your technique's getting worse and worse and worse, but you're just working hard to stay in the training zone and get the work done, you're not doing yourself any favors. So I strongly suggest you take at least a week of just doing unstructured paddling and just trying to get a feel for things again. Just trying to reacquaint yourself with good connection, good rhythm, good technique. And then once you feel like you've made some progress in that area, then you can start to do some work. And for the first couple of weeks, I would suggest that the work be largely base work. So I'm talking level 2, level 3. So for me, level 2 is sort of 70% or less of max. Level 3, it can go up to 80%, but I like to think of level 3 as being about 75%. It's like level 2 and just a little bit more. And just to do some structured work, you're starting to do structured workouts, but they're longer pieces with shorter rest, and you're working in training zones level 2, level 3. I still suggest that if you feel things are falling apart in terms of the way you're paddling, that you stop, refocus, and then start again. You may find that you only need to stop for 15 seconds or 30 seconds to be able to refocus and paddle well again. And you shouldn't worry too much about that 15 to 30 seconds because your heart rate really isn't going to drop too much in that 15 to 30 second period. And yet what you gain in terms of being able to paddle well is really worth it. So I'd suggest you do that for, another couple of weeks. And then you've got maybe 3 weeks of paddling on the water. Now you might be only 3 weeks away from your race. You're going to have to introduce some higher intensity paddling. And so what I suggest at this point is to do one workout a week that is kind of level 4, threshold type work. And the entire workout is at that level. So it's one out of maybe 5 or 6 paddling sessions a week that is totally higher intensity. It's a little early in the year to be doing that, but I think you need to do it if you're going to be doing one of these early season races. And Just like when you were doing the level 2, 3 work, if you feel like, your paddling isn't very good, you need to stop and refocus. The good thing is when you start to go and do more intense pieces, the pieces are shorter, so you can probably finish a piece, and then in the rest, refocus, gather your thoughts, reorganize what you want to try to accomplish in the next piece, and then go out and do it better. But I do also think that technique should be a bit of a limiting factor. So, you paddle harder than you were paddling in the couple of weeks prior when you're just doing base work, but you're still not going, like as aggressively, paddling as aggressively as you would be in the summer. You're still making technique, solid sound technique, the limiting factor, right? So you're going hard and, up to the point that your technique allows you to, and then you're not really going too much harder. You can kind of actually dance along the boundary between paddling really well and paddling just a little bit out of control. And so one piece you might be just slightly feeling like, I'm just a little bit out of control. I'll dial it down just a bit in the next piece and paddle, just take a little bit off and paddle with a better semblance of control. And then in the piece after that, you can push the boundaries just a little bit. Again, you're not going so hard that your technique just gets really ugly and messy. You're just going a little bit harder than maybe feels totally perfectly comfortable. But just kind of dancing back and forth across that boundary between perfect, where you feel like your technique is perfect, and where you feel like it's just a little bit out of control, is a great way to push that boundary higher. And that's going to be important to do in those final few weeks before you have that first race. The second thing I would suggest is that the rest of your work is going to be base oriented because it's early in the year and you still need base. And if you're racing a distance race, you need to be able to paddle hard for, an hour if you're doing a 10K race. So you're doing your base work, but instead of it being entirely level 2 or level 3, I suggest that you put little bits and pieces of level 4 or higher even work within the longer workouts. So one of the things I like to do is break these long workouts into 20-minute chunks. So I do like 20-minute pieces and then maybe take a minute or two rest between each 20-minute piece. And, you can alternate 2 minutes at level 2, a minute at level 4, 2 minutes at level, or 3 minutes at level 3, or 2 minutes at level 3. So you can go by 5-minute chunks. You can also do it, so that every 5 minutes you're getting a minute of level 4, which means about 20% of your work would be at level 4 or higher. If that's a little bit too ambitious in the first week, then you can do 10-minute chunks and you can have 1 minute of level 4 in the 10 minutes. Okay, but it's really important to be able to change gears when you're racing between, level 3 and level 4 or higher. So it makes this type of base training that you're doing really race realistic. And that's really going to help you when you line up on the starting line in the race, in your early season race, because you will have at least experienced that changing of gears in your training that you experience when you're racing. It's also going to give you a little bit of insight into how you manage your lactate levels. Because if you're going to level 4 or a little higher, you're going to start to be producing a little bit of lactate. And so if you're producing a little bit in training, say, for example, you go for a minute at level 4 in the body of a 20-minute piece, you're going to produce a little bit of lactate. And then when you take it back down to level 3 or level 2, you're going to get an idea of how long it takes you for that lactate to clear and before you can go hard again, right? So, this is what I would suggest that you do in sort of the second half of the chunk of time, the 6-week maybe period of time that you have between getting on the water and doing that first early season race, is doing doing one workout a week that's entirely higher intensity, and then doing putting little bits and pieces of level 4 or even higher into maybe 1 or 2 of the other base workouts, right? And I wouldn't put more than 20% of the workout is level 4 or higher. That's a lot, actually. So you might maybe do 10 to 15%. And then if you're starting to feel like you can handle that well, you could bump it up to 20%. So that should get you to your race. Now, obviously, you don't want to do that kind of work right up to the race. The week leading into the race, you're going to want to dial the work back a little bit so that you can have like a little mini peak for it and that you can be racing relatively fresh and rested. But at least you've made the most of the time available, and you've kind of covered all the things that you're going to need to be able to tap into when you're doing your early season race. Is it ideal preparation? Of course not, because ideally you might start your season with an 8-week or 12-week base block on the water, where you're slowly over that 8 to 12-week period starting to add in little bits and pieces of higher intensity work. And then your program would intensify, and you might have 6 to 8 weeks of higher intensity work where you're doing 3 really high intensity workouts a week before you do your most important race. So, it's really an abbreviated thing that you're doing here when you get on the water late and you have a race that you want to do well in fairly early. It's not ideal, but you can make it work, and you can do surprisingly well in that, with just that period of time to prepare, if you use the time wisely. For those that have a much bigger period of time to prepare for, like I said, you're going to stretch your period of base workout, to a much larger degree, and then you're going to have a much longer period of high intensity training to prepare for your race as well. But you're still following those same general principles when you get on the water, and early in your preparation of just getting back in the water. I firmly believe that if you feel like you're not paddling well, you stop, you refocus, and then you start paddling again, so that you're, again, trying to maximize the number of good strokes you take and minimize the number of poor strokes you take. That's going to go a long way towards establishing a really strong technical foundation that you can rely on through the entire season. And then the other thing is, the way that you introduce the high speed or the higher intensity work is the same as I outlined if you only have, say, 6 weeks to prepare, but you can roll it out into your training program a little bit more slowly. And so you're not, going from just doing your first higher intensity session, 1 week, and then 2 weeks later, doing more than that. You can have a much longer time to roll it out. And when your program intensifies, rather than doing one high intensity session a week and then fitting some high intensity work into longer base workouts, you're actually doing, if you're training 6 times a week, you might be doing 3 high intensity sessions in that week, say Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And then you might be doing 3 base sessions to maintain the high level of specific aerobic base that you developed in the first, say, 12 weeks on the water. And you might do that work on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So that's kind of the path that you have to take if you don't have a lot of time from getting on the water on day one to racing. If you only got 5 or 6 weeks, I think it's really important that you keep your expectations in perspective. It's unlikely that you will be able to perform as well as you will be able to perform later in the season when you've got much more training behind you. If you don't have like a bunch of races after that early season race, if you've got a period of time, like 8 weeks or something until your next big race, I also suggest that after that early season race, you go back and you do a little bit more base work to really top up your base, because that base is really important, that specific base. It's kind of like you're converting all of the base that you developed in your land-based aerobic work during the winter. You're sort of making that useful for paddling. And it takes a little bit of time on the water doing that type of work to really feel solid with that. But that's kind of the approach I would take. And as I said, keep your performance or keep your expectations in perspective. You can still do very well, and whatever the result is, you should have some confidence that it will be even better later in the season when you've got a little bit more mileage on the water under your belt. Okay, so if you've got any questions about this after watching the video, please comment and ask the question. I'll check the comments and I'll be happy to answer them for you. And if you're looking for guidance through this type of time on the water, I'm happy to provide it. This is really what the Spring Base program endeavors to do, to try to get people in a 6-week period, say, for example, from just getting on the water to being somewhat race ready. And so I would be happy to help you with that process. So check it all out at paddlemonster.com, and I'll see you next week.